Good morning. It's nice to be back. On behalf of P1 Consulting, it is my pleasure to introduce today's second general session of P3 2022, Start Me Up, Canada's Energy Renaissance. P1 Consulting is one of Canada's most dynamic and progressive consulting firms, with a strong reputation in infrastructure and real estate. Since we were founded over 20 years ago, P1 has participated in over 75 P3 projects, either as procurement advisor, fairness advisor, or facilities management advisor. We have worked with a broad range of jurisdictions, including municipal, provincial, federal, and other government agencies. As the industry has evolved and progressed, so have we. Over the last 5 years, P1 has participated on numerous progressive design build projects and integrated project delivery models. We've also advised on a number of energy performance contracts, assisting with the deal structure, contract development and procurement, through to the implementation phase. The last few years have seen a number of remarkable changes in infrastructure, both here in Canada and globally. One of the fastest growing asset classes is energy. Every day, it seems, a new partnership is being announced, a new project is breaking ground, and another report comes out stressing the complex issues and tremendous capital needed to propel the energy sector forward. To meet Canada's commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050, tens of billions in new investments are needed to transform the country's electricity grid as it rushes to embrace more solar, hydro, wind, nuclear, and other alternative power sources amid the great fossil fuel phase-out. At the same time, experts warn we'll need to significantly increase our generation, transmission, and storage capacity to meet the coming surge in electricity demand to power new electric vehicles and industries. The urgency is real, and the timeline is daunting. Today, our panel will examine the role industry leaders are playing in meeting this challenge. And of particular interest to us at P1 Consulting, our experts will explore how energy performance contracts are adopting P3 attributes to pave the way for success. Leading this discussion today will be our moderator, Sylvie Godin, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Conseil des Infrastructures. A lawyer by training, Sylvie has a long track record in the management of sensitive issues, strategic counseling, and governmental affairs. She's worked in the public and private sector in various positions at Bell, CIBC, and CN. From 1986 to 1994, she was also Communications Director in the Office of the Premier of Quebec, Robert Bourassa. So without further ado, please help me welcome Sylvie to the stage.
J'aimerais débuter en saluant les membres du Conseil des infrastructures qui sont présents aujourd'hui en très grand nombre et saluer aussi la présence des représentants du gouvernement du Québec, notamment la SQI, pour cette participation assidue à chaque année. We have a lot to discuss, so on this panel, let's go right to the introduction of our expert. Please welcome on the stage Ehren Cory, Chief Executive Officer, Canada Infrastructure Bank. As CEO, Ehren is focused on CIB's strategic direction, including implementing the $10 billion growth plan to accelerate infrastructure investment in Canada and building the CIB as a result-oriented organization. Hassaan Khan, AERA General Manager, Sustainable Infrastructure Canada, JCI, with a personal mission to affect sustainable infrastructure transformation in Canadian buildings. Hassaan Khan's day job is to lead a team that helps clients convert energy and carbon waste into financial resources to affect climate action in their buildings. Louise Panneton, President PI Consulting and P3 Advisors. Louise currently works with owner representative and specialized in the procurement, implementation, and evaluation of alternative service delivery and P3 solutions. She has directly participated on more than 75 P3 projects through Canada. And our last panelist, Mike Rencheck. Mike is President and CEO of Bruce Power. Mike has served in a number of senior roles over 35 years of career. He served as a Deputy Chief Operating Officer for Arriva Group, overseeing its extensive global capital portfolio and of nuclear and renewable projects. Bruce Power is committed to achieve net zero by 2027. So welcome our panelists. So before we get the guts of the discussion, I was asked to make sure that everybody has access to the application. And for the question period, you'll be allowed, you know how to use the application to ask your question at the end. So let's start the discussion. Let me ask you how your organization or your clients are contributing to the clean energy.
Maybe I'll start.
Who's jump?
I'll jump in. So we work with owner-occupiers generally, so provinces, large corporate entities like CIBC, the banks, the telecoms. You know, where they're contributing is looking more long-term in terms of how they can meet some of their targets and essentially moving the money forward to be able to benefit for a longer period of time. So we're seeing a big shift from being, I'm looking at the next year to two, to I'm looking at the next, how do I get to 2050 and the next number of years. So we have seen a huge transformation. It's ongoing. We all in this room have to be advocates for that. We have to help them understand the benefit, et cetera. So, I think they're working hard at overcoming some of the challenges, understanding the financial models and working through them, which again, I agree they're very similar to P3s. And really advocating for not just replacing assets, but thinking about the future. So our clients are really engaged in energy type projects.
Well, we're Canada's largest public-private partnership at Bruce Power between us and the 407. So
Yes.
that's good. We're happy to be here. It's really exciting. And we do that through a number of mechanisms, but predominantly what we are as a company is we are the largest operating nuclear site in the world. We generate 30% of Ontario's electricity at 30% less than the average cost to generate. We also make life-saving medical isotopes under this structure. So we're saving lives every day. We make cobalt-60, which is used to sterilize 40% of the once-use medical devices around the world. And if you think about that throughout the pandemic, this P3 structure really has had an impact worldwide, globally. But more importantly, we're going through the life extension program of our assets of Unit 3 through 8, which will enable them to operate all the way out through 2064. And what is important about that for folks in this room, it represents the largest private sector infrastructure project in Canada. So we're investing about $13 billion that'll extend from 2016, will go all the way out to 2033. But we're not just limited by that. Those partnerships that we're forming will set the stage for new energy generation here in Canada using nuclear and other technologies. And this clean energy transition, I think, is being set forth by you in this room as part of this P3 structure and participation that I think will have a long-lasting effect, not only here in Canada, but around the world.
So for Johnson Controls, I can just describe really on two fronts what Johnson Controls is doing. So a lot of people know our enterprise probably in this P3 space as an entity that's responsible for operations, maintenance, lifecycle management in many of the P3s we've been involved with. One of the things that the business I lead actually has evolved from is our legacy ESCO business, energy service company business. And today it's become essentially an energy efficiency and decarbonization business. And what's really happened is a transformation of our customers from, what people used to imagine ESCO being, which was, you go in, you sign a performance contract, you do a bunch of HVAC lighting and controls, and there's a payback. Now these programs are becoming immense, and they are focused on leveraging capital and expanding the amount of decarbonization that can happen and going well beyond into actually the systems that transfer energy throughout buildings and campuses, whether it be heat, chilled water, what have you, microgrids. Our scope has entirely changed in the last decade in terms of what we do. So that's kind of what we do for our clients. The second part is just as a company, many of you may not know this, but we have a big technology division that has a lot of big factories. We are actually investing in decarbonizing our own buildings. So just like my business focuses on scope 1 and 2 emission reductions in buildings, that is also what we are doing and putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to Johnson's own factories. So that's a little bit about what Johnson Controls is doing right now.
Excellent. And so I'm Ehren. I'm the CEO of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Many of you in the room might know the CIB, some not, but we were created with the idea that we could invest taxpayer money, federal money, into infrastructure projects to accelerate the building of the infrastructure we need for the next 50 to 100 years. And we're focused in a number of sectors, all of them places where there's an opportunity to leverage the best of the public and the private sector in all sorts of different structures. But we have 5 core sectors we're focused in. Some of them we're not here to talk about today, like broadband or transit or transportation and trade. But 2 of our sectors are clean power, so everything from power generation, transmission, battery storage. And the other is what we call green infrastructure, which includes hydrogen and the hydrogen value chain, building retrofits, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So the CIB's job is to invest money in those projects with asset owners, people like Hassaan or people like Mike, to help accelerate their projects and get projects done faster and better than they would have happened otherwise. And so obviously a big part of our mandate is around the energy transition and around decarbonizing. So we're investing, as I say, in projects big and small across the country to help make that happen.
Now, let's stick to the decarbonization investment in an environment where interest rates are increasing. Considering the higher borrowing cost and the Bank of Canada's purpose driving this, do you believe that building owners should pause saving the planet until we see inflation coming down? Let's start with you, Ehren.
Well, sure. Is that a choice to pause saving the planet? I don't think it's... well, 2 things I would say about it. No, I think actually this is a great time. Well, first, we have to reflect on the fact that the supply chain challenges that we've seen of the past few years and the inflationary pressures we've seen of the past few years, they're not separate from the climate emergency. They're actually very linked issues. And I think we've got to pause and think, wait a second, why are we facing some of the challenges we are now? It's because of climate volatility and broken supply chains and increasing challenges in meeting our energy transition needs. So I think pausing is the very, very, very last thing we should do. I also think there's a great economic case for it because as much as one of the big places we're seeing inflation is in energy costs. And that's going to continue to be the case. And so I think now is a really important time for us all to be investing. Now, I think in periods, I love the last panel was talking about VUCA, periods of volatility and uncertainty, which we find ourselves in. Sometimes project owners it's a reason. I was going to say the word excuse. Maybe that's an okay word. It's an excuse to pause. And I think we need to fight that instinct, all of us collectively. And I think the CIB, part of our job is to unstick some of that and to provide catalysts, provide catalytic funding to help nudge those projects over the line. And then when they happen and they make money, we get paid back. Because as I say, we're an investor. We make loans or we make equity investments. So our view is this is a great time to invest. And it's actually a time, uncertainty is a great opportunity for investors to put money into positive payback projects, building retrofits, deployment of electric fleets, that sort of thing, because the paybacks are only going to be better in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing, innovative thought. Planet Earth doesn't care about inflation. So, take that. But, one of the things I think it's an opportunity as well when you look at the environment we're in that there's a couple ways I see of us really sort of moving forward in this environment with all this inflationary pressure. One is that scale actually will help. Scale will actually help to combat inflationary pressure. Being able to do bigger deals and try to leverage and make more incentive for suppliers to work with you to get the cost down. I think doing one-off energy projects with a $200,000 grant here and a $500,000 grant here just isn't going to make a difference. And it frankly, it's not aligned with the timeline that we're on based on even the recent summit in Egypt, right? And so, we got a lot to do there. I think, one of the options that we don't have is just let's see what happens. Let's wait. So a lot of the companies out there that have made ESG goals, they've actually stated, goals for net zero at various stages or 50% reduction at various stages with 2030, 2040, et cetera. So here's what we can picture, right? Everyone's waiting for the deadline, right? And if you think we have supply chain issues now, think about the supply chain issues then if we're forced to act, right? Because we do have this balancing act of the fact that the carbon pricing and the cost of carbon will continue to have pressure upward as the planet faces the crisis that it's in, right? And so just think about what's going to happen when we get there. So I think today is a time definitely to act and leverage scale. In fact, one of the recent conversations our North American vice president of sales had with a big state university system in the southern U.S. was exactly that, was, well, how do you plan to combat inflation? I think that particular university system in the southern U.S., they said that they, in the last year, experienced 15% construction inflation alone, right? And so their response was, we believe that the only way out of this, because we can't just stop building, we can't stop retrofitting our campuses, is going to be scale. So just some food for thought there. So I'll leave it at that. Yep.
I'd like to add something to this discussion about stopping. I think we cannot stop at all. And really what is at stake here is our future. So when you look at Bruce Power, stable energy policy has enabled us to continue on our operations as well as our refurbishment program. And actually, we're reaching out through that program to rebuild the supply chain here in Ontario. You see, in 2016, we signed a contract at scale to refurbish, effectively rebuild 3 large-scale nuclear plants. Think about that. What we ended up doing as part of our P3 structure is we issued contracts to most of our large suppliers, if not all of them, for 8 to 10 years into the future. That enabled them to recapitalize their manufacturing facilities. Canadian companies like BWXT, Aecon are involved, SNC-Lavalin, and on and on and on. Throughout the pandemic, we worked hand in hand to be able to keep working. And because of that long-term view, that stable energy policy, these companies have been able to lock in pricing in 2017 timeframe and rebuild their manufacturing infrastructure right here in Canada. So 95% of all the money that we spend in the refurbishment of our plants stays in Ontario. 98% stays in Canada. Nuclear is a made in Ontario, a made in Canada solution. And it's been able to continue on because of that long-term view. Our investors, both our bondholders and our owners, continue to see value in our proposition as a green energy investment. And to that extent, we issued the very first green bond for nuclear in 2021 worldwide. And now we see others following suit here in Canada with OPG and our friends EDF in France. So I think stopping this energy transition, I don't think that's part and parcel to our conversation. It's how do we look long-term? How do we set the structure up that enables long-term investing? And when we do that, we'll see the investors come into this segment. We'll see our ability to manage pricing and manage projects well into the future.
And maybe just to close off, I'd like to build on what Hassaan was saying. Like, think big, think bold. We went out working with CNL with an RFP a number of years ago. And really, we were thinking about, well, we'll do a couple of projects here and there. JCI came in with big, bold, and incredibly comprehensive campus project. A great success in my opinion. So even as you're thinking about embarking on this, think big, think bold. It is a holistic approach. There's a lot of benefit to it.
let me turn the next question to you, Ehren. What about the CIB expansion mandate toward SMR and hydrogen?
Yeah.
Jean.
Hydrogène.
Hydrogen, yeah.
Yes.
It's easier in French. I'm sorry, that word.
There are some that are really hard to say in the other language. I know from experience. So the CIB, as I said, we launched 4.5 years ago or so now, and with these 5 core sectors that I mentioned earlier that we're focused in. But the way the CIB works as a Crown corporation every year is to work with our shareholder, the Government of Canada, to figure out, are we focused in the right places? Are we investing our money aligned to the policy goals of the government, right? And we've got a lot of independence in the way we make investment decisions and how we evaluate those. But fundamentally, we're a tool of a federal policy. And so last year at this time, Sylvie, when we were talking with our colleagues in Ottawa about where are we making a difference? And the CIB over the last few years has really ramped up our investment activity. We're now somewhere over 40 investments in projects. We had started this dialogue. Where else should we be? Are there other places we should be focused? Are there adjacent sectors still within those broad areas? And a few came to the top of the list, as you mentioned. So one was in nuclear power, as Mike passionately does. And by the way, I just want to say to everyone, if you want to do one thing today, ask Mike to show you his socks. I'm a big fan of colorful socks. Mike is sporting, I don't know, a uranium-238 molecule or something on his socks. I can see it from here. It's I know I've seen those before.
They're all the rage. And if you want a pair of socks, contact Pat Dalzell. He's here. He'll get you a pair of socks.
So as Mike really passionately described, I think nuclear as a non-emitting baseload sort of power is a huge part of our energy future and our solution. So we had a dialogue with the government about that and about how small modular reactors, both in energy grid scale, but even also for industrial applications, is part of the solution. So that was added to our mandate in the budget of last spring. Similarly, as you mentioned, Sylvie, hydrogen, low-carbon fuels more generally, a really important part of our energy solution and a place where Canada can be a world leader. We've got renewable and clean power on the one side. It's really hard to export electrons, but it's easier to export other forms of energy, like converting those electrons into a low-carbon fuel, into something like hydrogen or other forms of low-carbon fuels. So in our budget in the spring, those things were added to the CIB's mandate, and I'm really proud that in the 8 or so months since then, we've announced an investment with OPG and at Darlington in their small modular reactor work. We've launched a program around electric vehicle charging infrastructure. I didn't mention that, but that's another of the new mandate areas we were given. We're about to make our first investment in a hydrogen facility sometime in the coming weeks. And so we're making a lot of progress. But to me, it's just the natural evolution. And every year, the CIB, our job is to engage with Ottawa and talk about, are there other areas in the broad spaces of infrastructure where public and private collaboration can make sense, and the CIB can aim its tools. And so that was last year's exercise. We'll continue to do that. But it's been really, I think, impactful, and we've seen a number of new investments in those spaces.
And tell me, how does Canada compare to the rest of the world? You mentioned a little bit, so maybe you want to jump in on this.
Yeah, I'll talk about your investment into nuclear power really positions Canada for the long term as a clean energy producer. And let me talk about that a little bit. You see, here in Ontario, one of the best kept secrets is that we are a world leader in a clean electric grid. Our grid is about 93% clean energy sources. If you think about this, deep decarbonization is believed to be below 50 grams equivalent of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Well, here in Ontario, we're at 35 grams. Those claiming to be world leaders like Germany are 300 to 400 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. California is about 150 grams a kilowatt hour. But that's not the story. The story is really the cost of electricity. It's the affordability. Because in Ontario, we predominantly do it with nuclear power, hydropower, supplemented by renewables, we're at about 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour Canadian. If you compare that to California at 30 cents and Germany's north of 40 cents right now, we have a model that works for us here in Ontario. We have a model that would work for the world. And when you think about that, our Our portfolio mix here is 60% nuclear in Ontario, 25% hydroelectric, about 7% wind, 1% solar, and all that's backed up by natural gas. So it's a very clean and efficient grid. Sustaining that for the long term means we are adding value, and that value is affordability for businesses and citizens here in Ontario on a clean electric grid. The next steps for us is to take advantage of that grid to make sure that we're crediting our manufacturers with the fact that they have clean energy here in Ontario compared to any other place in the world. We can have that advantage with the right policies put in place because we are a clean energy sector, which means hydrogen, when you look at transportation, really has a role in helping clean hydrogen. And yes, nuclear can play a substantial role in the production of hydrogen. At our facility at Bruce A, when it's fully refurbished, we'll be able to make about 12% more steam than we use. If we direct that to hydrogen production, we could be the single largest hydrogen producer, not only in Ontario, but throughout Canada, with a clean energy footprint to make it from. So it's these types of things that are possible when we all work together, and it's this long-term view with the right energy structure and the right strategy behind it that enables all of our companies to participate in the future.
Now, let me jump in talking about the energy performance contracts. Do they help us achieve our sustainability goals, including GHG, reduction targets? What type, and maybe two sub-question, what type of projects and what types of delivery models that would be applicable for implementing energy products?
Maybe I can start, definitely. And essentially, I'm a big advocate of EPC contracts being quite similar to P3 arrangements. And really, I'll state out loud here today, it's very important to have the discipline that we've been able to impart into the P3 sector on these contracts. Because right now, they're a little bit all over the place. And what we've been able to do is really beneficial. I mean, the first thing they do is they accelerate the benefit. So we're able to bring forward the implementation of projects over a long period of time. So longer term contracts that allow you to get the benefit now rather than wait till we've got other supply chain issues. It's important through these as well to make sure that you're bringing and engaging the right partners. So there's a place for everyone in this industry to make sure that they're being built properly, they're being managed properly. And by the way, we're bringing the innovation. We're thinking big, we're thinking bold, we're thinking about things beyond just lighting projects. They allow us to push the envelope if they're structured properly. So again, not just systematically doing one thing at a time, but thinking over a long period of time, how can we do the best? And for owners, they provide performance guarantees, very similar to P3 projects. So over the course of the arrangement, you have a for sure rather than a maybe. So these are big benefits for EPC type contracts. Really one of the things I was chatting about with someone yesterday is they also allow owners to free up capital to do other things. So the capital they would have been spending on fixing their HVAC system or replacing their windows, they're able to actually redeploy to something else because now it forms part of something, again, bigger. So, they're very beneficial. And again, I do see a lot of the same or similar attributes as P3s, and I think we're going to get there in terms of more standardization.
One of the things as well that we found is projects these days are starting to become programs. So projects, by the way, our company, we still do all day, right? In fact, we have a deal with the CIB as an aggregator where we'll still go and do projects for clients, right? Project events. But when I talk about programs, I guess maybe I'll take an example as well. You may have heard we're doing a program with a bunch of the military bases for the Department of National Defense in Canada. And so what's changing is not only is it about the measures, there's a couple elements. I mean, one is that there's this concept of leverage capital. So they invest a tremendous amount of capital into these projects now because what it does is it enables essentially you to fit a lot more of what are essentially what the old term was long-term payback items within the deal. And a lot of those items actually are what contribute to decarbonization. So essentially what's happening now, and this trend is now going way beyond D&D, is a client who says, you know what, I have $10 million to do decarbonization at all my facilities. When they're engaging with us, they're seeing how we can turn that into $25 or $30 million of investment, right? With just the 10 that they have. And it's really about creating that program piece. I think the second element of programs, and by the way, programs involves all sorts of new services as well we deliver, such as Indigenous engagement and helping our clients as well in that sphere, as well as ourselves. We're still early in our journey. Awareness, sustainability awareness has become a big component of those. So one of the other things, though, that we're seeing, and this is where I think it may be exciting to the P3 space, is that we're seeing that with this transition, and whether a client is looking at their strategy as electrification or some form of future that is going to involve a fundamental change in the technology that provides, the comfort services to their buildings. One of the struggles that out there is our labor supply, right? And the amount of skilled operations and maintenance staff out there available to operate systems is not, ample right now, and people are retiring and they're not getting replaced at a sufficient rate. And so what's happening is with the technology changing at the same time, a lot of owners are looking at that as a risk transfer opportunity, right? Can we actually partner with a Johnson Controls or a company like us to actually transition a lot of that operations, maintenance, and life cycle, along with a program that infuses the required artificial intelligence, AI, into those building systems that are getting retrofitted, right? So that in the future, these buildings can operate with a less of a staffing complement than they did in the past. Because guess what? The staffing isn't going to be available. So that's a key strategy we're seeing emerge right now with especially campus owners.
Sylvie, just one thing I would add, it's interesting, building on Louise's point. Here we are I've been in this conference, I'm not Mark Bain 30 years in, but 10 or 11 years I think I've been on this stage. And I think it's notable that we're talking about energy in the morning of day one of this conference, because for a long time, the P3 definition in Ontario, for sure, and even in this country, has been pretty narrowed, around what we've done. And as Louise describes, there's so many elements in the energy transition, energy performance contracts. We're doing, our project, a battery storage facility in partnership with a private partner, a First Nations partner. There are district energy projects that have all the hallmarks of P3s. So there's, in terms of getting innovation from private sector players, delivering public outcomes and public good, often with a public asset still in public ownership, those core elements of P3s exist. And Mike's been saying for years, Bruce Power is the largest P3 in Canada. I've heard, and I remember in my old days when but it's not a DBF or a DBFOM on a hospital or a courthouse in Ontario. So it kind of, but the truth is there is so much innovation happening in this space. And I think for people in this room, the opportunity to apply the principles of innovation and of partnership and public outcomes, but with private creativity, there's a whole bunch of that opportunity in the energy space that Louise and Hassaan are describing that we see.
I would just add, we at Bruce Power will be a net zero company by 2027. And when we look internally, we're looking at how do we get emissions out of our buildings, out of our transportations. We implemented a battery project about 2 years ago on our site, and it's been up and functioning at a very high level. We also, adding on with what Hassaan says, we use Johnson Controls to manage our buildings now, and the savings we're getting from that, it's just been astounding. So on the journey of ESG investing, when we really look longer term at that aspect, it really makes sense for companies to invest in this to be able to continue to attract investors and bondholders. We're leveraged at about $3.5 billion in bonds for our refurbishment program, but it's that long-term view that enables us to make these investments and continue down this path.
Now, I'm happy to see that the app is used by the people in the room. So we'll take one question immediately. But I know it normally it's at the end, and that's why I'm looking at the clock, because I have two excellent next questions that I'm keeping still. For Mike, you mentioned that 90% of the Bruce Power spend stays in Ontario. How do you calculate or evaluate that metric and ensure that lower down the supply chain, the inputs remain Ontario produce inputs?
Thank you. That is a great question, and I'll answer it twofold. One, because part of our proposition at Bruce Power is to be in the economic development business. You see, nuclear power is also about creating manufacturing jobs, creating jobs here in Canada. We're a Canadian technology. It was developed here in Canada. It was originated by AECL, and it was manufactured and built here in Canada. Now, how do we go about doing that? We deal with about 480 companies directly as tier 1 companies with us. Those companies then have hundreds of other sub-suppliers. We look at who the sub-suppliers are because quality means everything in our business. We cannot afford rework. That's where money bleeds out of these large projects. So as we are running these large projects, both Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power, we collaborate and cooperate on supply chains. We go out and do individual audits of all the companies, who they are sub-supplying, what the quality mechanisms are and the specs that they're building to. That's why throughout the pandemic, we've been able to keep working and keep functioning. We didn't miss a beat because of that supply chain. First, we put protocols in place at our facility to keep our people safe. We had anywhere from 10,000 to 12,000 unique individuals come into our property each week to continue on our life extension program. We took these same protocols back into the companies and into the sub-suppliers. The nuclear industry and the building trades, for that matter, that worked on our facility, we had 0 incidents of COVID inside the gates. Folks might have had it outside, but we kept them safe while they were working. We did almost 150,000 COVID tests between September of 2020 and the summer of 2021, just on our property alone. But that's how we do that. We go down and we make sure where it's coming from. Now, on a few occasions, companies have closed manufacturing facilities here in Canada and moved production elsewhere. We've still bought from the parent, but that production is coming. In one case, motors used to be built in Petersburg, and they're now being built in Nancy, France. We'd love to have that back in Petersburg, right? Let's talk to GE about bringing that back home. But we place great pride in having things made in Canada, and we take great pride in the economic development that we're all able to achieve when that happens. For every dollar we spend that stays in Canada, it creates about $7 to $10 spent elsewhere. In Ontario alone, we generate $3 to $4 billion of GDP, and throughout Canada, it's $8 to $11 billion in GDP, 22,000 incremental jobs just from the life extension program of Bruce Power.
Thank you. Now, Ehren, last spring's federal budget announced new investment areas for the bank. What are those new initiatives? You mentioned a little bit, but tell us how you were able to move your expanded mandate forward.
Yeah, well, I was talking about this earlier. Yeah, there are 4 or 5 new investment areas identified for us last year. I'll just go through them again. So one was in small modular reactors and the expansion of nuclear as the next generation of nuclear as part of our needs. The second was in carbon capture and storage. Again, how to decarbonize that part of our energy sector and create clean options for our energy. The third was in the production of hydrogen and all low-carbon fuels, so production, distribution, transportation of those fuels. And then there was also an expansion into electric vehicle and hydrogen charging infrastructure and refueling infrastructure. So again, if you want to create the downstream demand for these, and all of that, I guess you could look at that thematically, it's all oriented around the energy transition and continuing to build the infrastructure we need to have the economy and the kind of clean economy that we need to have in the future as we go through electrifying our transportation networks, our buildings networks, etc. So it's all, I guess, mostly upstream of that, but trying to build the infrastructure that we need for that transition.
And I'll turn to one of the questions to you, Ehren. Isn't there enough private capital appetite in energy projects, that's CIB, which provides public funding involvement is necessary? Do we see on the screen? No, so that's why I need to read it. Do you do any sounding among equity and debt providers to gauge their interest before engaging in the energy project? Do you lead transactions and syndicate to private creditors?
I love this question. Thank you for whoever asked it. So it's a really important question, and it gives me a chance to talk about the CIB and our mandate. As it says, isn't there enough private capital appetite? And so a great project for the CIB is an infrastructure project that gets built with zero of our dollars. That's wonderful, and we aspire to that. That's you get the public benefit and outcome without it. The CIB really is supposed to be a gap filler, so when there's a project, a fundamentally good project, but there's something in the way of it happening. And usually that falls in a few buckets. One is around commercial risk or uncertainty. So I think of some of the early battery storage projects that we've been involved in, and they're going to be storing power and potentially selling it back to the grid in a merchant way. That's a very uncertain business. And private investors might not have the appetite to do that or the confidence to do that yet. Give it some time. A lot of our investments are supposed to be temporary. Hassaan mentioned we're doing energy building retrofits, including with JCI, and we have deals with 8 or 9, I think, large building owners and aggregators like Johnson. That's not a market I think we need to be in for forever. I think the goal in many ways is to prove out the model. As Hassaan says, the challenge in that business is very long paybacks, and again, a little bit of uncertainty. Does the technology that we're applying really do what it says? Will we see the savings in our energy costs and the reduction in our consumption and the reduction in our GHG emissions that the engineers predict? And so there's a little bit of a gap. Again, if we get over that hump, there will be a time when, yes, private capital will fully fill it. So to answer the question, in spaces where there is private capital, there's a PPA to do a renewable project in a jurisdiction. We're probably not in that. It's when there is commercial uncertainty, technology uncertainty, trying to get down the learning curve, something like on small modular reactors. Again, when private sector investors at some reasonable rate of return will do that, the CIB won't need to. We do gauge the market, and we've got examples. I can think of an example on district energy where there, again, another example of a build it and they will come kind of problem. You're putting in a huge fixed asset, and then you're waiting, and it's quite uncertain, the timing of customer uptake. It depends on how a city develops. You think of district energy, like a lot of infrastructure, you build it once for a very, very long time. But in a project that we're involved in, we did go to the market and go engage with private lenders and create an opportunity for private investment, which significantly reduced our investment, which is great. We are still involved in the project, but in a much smaller way than we would have been. So yeah, that's the goal. We're meant to be the last stop, if you will, in the capital stack. If private capital will do it, you wouldn't need us, and that's great.
Now, I just noticed that you were all very effective communicating your passion about the subject. But let me ask you this question. What era are you really passionate within this sector?
Well, I'll start. And what I find passionate about it is, for the first time in a very long time, O&M is sexy. Because people are thinking now about how things are going to get operated and how they can continue to drive, energy performance, not only when they do the project, but as they implement it and manage it. So a great passion of mine is O&M, of course, and as you all know, so that is really very interesting. The second is thinking about assets with a longer term. Again, less short-sighted views on what's happening with the assets. So again, bigger, broader, bolder in terms of things that are being implemented, which are really important, I think, in this sector, in the real estate. The effects are widespread, and the impacts are significant as you implement these types of projects. The last piece for me is the ability to introduce innovation. I've been involved in a lot of RFPs where the first statement is proven technology, right? You start with proven technology before you even write the first sentence of your RFP, where, innovative technology needs a forum to be proven. These programs, as Hassaan has been talking about, and the manner they get implemented, which are a little bit more like progressive design build, integrating the P3, allow for these innovations to find light. So, really thinking about the future, and it's a benefit to us all. So that's my passion.
Yeah, and so I think passionately about efficiency, right? So there's a saying, actually, one of our global vice presidents likes to say is, lose the weight first, then buy the suit. Right. So, so really, the strategies, and a great example, we did a program for Laurier University a few years ago that we essentially focused entirely, firstly, on getting their building loads right-sized, right? The building efficiency portion before we started tackling the central plant and the microgrid strategies. So if you go in sort of a programmatic order with a strategy to implement, get the returns that you need, make sure you minimize the capital investment you need, you can really get a lot out of it. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing I just want to emphasize is that also I think right now there's this preconceived notion that to decarbonize, all paths are through electrification. And so there's a tremendous amount of carbon that we cycle through human activity that's captured in landfill, in food waste, in wastewater, right? It's called, a great opportunity and resource for renewable natural gas. So, for those of you who think that, combustion's going away, I don't believe a decarbonized future is without combustion. So that is something that I think just we really need to look at. And by the way, if everyone was to electrify, we have other issues with regards to distribution that have to get handled still, right? A tremendous bottleneck in terms of the amount of transmission capability and capacity there is today if we just flipped a switch and electrified everyone. So efficiency first, well, obviously, reduce everything, but then also look for the gold in them hills, right? Like there is in all of this, the human activity, there is a tremendous amount. By the way, I would say one element to watch this year, I think most innovation globally that will happen around RNG is going to be in Europe because they are forced now to act, right? The turning off of Russian gas, right, and the coming and onset of winter, you will see activity, I believe, like nowhere else before. And I think they're going to actually set a lot of technologies that we're going to next year possibly be talking about in different sorts of forums, including this one, about what can be done. So with that, I'll leave you with those thoughts.
So who wanted to jump in?
I'll let Ehren go last.
Yeah, so go ahead then, Mike. Yeah, please. Please.
Well, so a few things. I think the passion around clean energy, it helps everybody. And the ability to do this here in Canada and at home with homegrown technologies. We know we can do this. We have the world's leading clean energy sector here in Ontario. We need to further take advantage of that and capitalize on it. And it's more than just energy. When you look at our facilities at Bruce Power, we started in 2016 with a 6,300 megawatt site. By the time we're done in 2033, we'll have generated over 1,000 extra megawatts in that property. So it'll be a 7,300 megawatt site. 1,000 megawatts is 1 million homes of energy. But it doesn't stop there. Think about this. Half of our Bruce facility was shut down in the 1990s. When we got to 2005, we had about 53 smog days a year because we were burning fossil fuels here in Ontario. You couldn't breathe in Toronto. The Bruce facility was restarted under the public-private partnership model. When Bruce A came back online in 2013 and 2014, we were able to phase out coal. How many smog days do we experience in Toronto now? 0. It might be a few hours or minutes here or there where we exceed. But we've had the ability to demonstrate to the world that when you phase out coal, you can breathe. It does have health effects and health benefits. But we also can look at healthcare in general. I think that in this energy transition, it's not just one size fits all. It's not just energy. It's what else we can do with it. At Bruce Power, we're moving into medical isotopes in a very large way, along with our partners at Ontario Power Generation. We're changing the way the world can receive isotopes. That means medical treatments become more available to more people around the world at an affordable price. It also means that cancer researchers, where they were constrained in the past because they didn't have a way of generating the isotope at a scale where it could be fungible for people, they just stopped doing the research and moved on to the next isotope. We make cobalt-60 that sterilizes 40% of the once-use medical devices around the world. We treat brain tumors. We just put a brand new production system in place, an innovation where we can make isotopes in partnership with the Saugeen Ojibwa Nation, online, real time, all the time. It just went live about a month ago. We're making lutetium-177, which is a prostate cancer treatment. With the very first production run, we made more lutetium-177 than every other source in the world. And now we can do that every week. That isotope alone is being advanced by Dr. Rebecca Wong here in Toronto at the University Health Network. She has a department that's breaking ground called theranostics. It's a way to treat cancer through diagnostics at the same time. When she shows you the images of a person who has cancer throughout their body and now suddenly it's gone after treatments, it just sends chills through your spine. And knowing that we can be a part of that as a P3 and advance that, I think when you look at what we can do when we all work together along these lines, we just signed with Boston Scientific of Canada now to start making liver cancer treatments. And then what are the next 6? So I think, as we look towards the future, it's not just energy. It's energy and what else we can do together. And it's this partnership in Canada with the smart people that we have here in Ontario and throughout the country. We can innovate and we create new technologies for the world. Yes, we are a superpower in isotope production here in Canada. Who would have known that? We are a superpower.
Thank you. Ehren?
Hard to top that, Mike. Look, I love all my children. And I love all of the various investment spaces because we really do. And Hassaan's right. There's not one pathway or one solution. So we're working on regional transmission because we do need to be able to move clean power around this country differently. We're working on the generation side. We're working on the fuel side because I'm with you. I don't think electrification is the only solution. But I guess the thing I'm most passionate about is we're in this moment where 2 things are true. One, I think the need is well proven, the science is really clear, and the will is really high of everyone. But we're stuck, and we're stuck on 2 things I think get us stuck. One is complexity. It's it's almost overwhelming because to get a project done, you have to deal with a regulatory process. You don't know what the market's going to look like. Am I going to be paid a green premium for this product I'm making? And so I think project owners and really innovative people are just frozen. And then you throw in your question about inflation and what's happening in the world. And it's really easy to be stuck. And so finding ways to unstick us, and the CIB is a little part of that because by putting in risk capital, by taking a non-market, to the earlier question, taking a position no one else can, that's why we exist. So I'm passionate about finding ways where we can, by sharing in some of those risks and taking away some form of uncertainty, make things happen that aren't otherwise, number one. And the second thing linked to that is I think we have, and Mike is a great example of this, the level of entrepreneurial spirit, or the desire, the creativity of people. And this is public and private, by the way. I meet people in the public sector all the time with incredibly creative ideas. Trying to enable some of those to happen and to allow us to dream bigger. Louise talked earlier about being big and bold. So again, this at the CIB, by us taking a risk position, sharing in that, we can hopefully scale ideas faster, take things that are on the margin, but they're in the next 50 to 100 years absolutely necessary and part of our solution, and making them happen 5 or 10 years earlier. That's where we're focused. So that combination of trying to unstick things and bring that innovation and ingenuity quicker to fruition, which again then will allow us to be out of that market and onto the next one, where we can again apply our money to help give that little push. That's what I'm passionate about.
This is great. So I'm looking at the clock right now. I guess we don't have any more questions, but at least we got those 2 questions. So I think you were a fantastic panel. I'm very pleased. For me, it was my first experience, and I want to be back because this is great having such interesting. I've learned a lot, and I guess the people in the room as well. So I want to thank you, P1 Consulting, for bringing up this idea of panel. This is great, supporting this important talk. And I guess before we head out into the first breakout session, the organizers have asked me to thank the sponsors of those 2 upcoming sessions. So I have some housekeeping. Sorry for a minute. The First Nation Major Project Coalition, the Concert Infrastructure, BTY Group, and the Government of Canada Trade Commissioner Service. So I guess that's conclude our panel. Thank you very much, and thank you to the room.
Thank you.
Thank you.